Welcome back, everybody, to Babywearing and Breastfeeding Nurturing Miracles, the podcast where we do a deep dive into everything baby-wearing and breastfeeding, specifically tailored to our medically complex kids. I'm your host, Megan Pa, and today we're going to be talking to a certified nurse midwife. Story has been a midwife now for 14 years. She started off at a birth center and is now in her own practice for the past roughly 10 years, right, Story?
Yeah, 9 or so.
9. Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you, and actually we have a really cool connection that I want to share, which is that, I decided to have my babies at home, and Story was one of the midwives that I saw in my first pregnancy because I went to birth care. So she didn't end up being there at the delivery, but it was kind of cool that I think I saw you during my pregnancy because we see everybody when we come through. And then the other really cool connection was during that pregnancy, I found out that we had a really good mutual close friend that I worked with. And then I think she, did she go to your church? Like how do you and Fray Marie know each other?
Yeah. Childhood church.
Yeah. And isn't that neat? Like it was just a small world. So that was just really cool how we connected in that way.
And I feel like we've stayed connected with between then and now. My sister-in-law took childbirth classes from you.
Oh God, and I always forget that. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. It's just a small world. Like we just keep bouncing into each other, which I love because you're such a cool person. So Story, can you briefly share your journey into becoming a midwife? Actually, I'm very curious. I've never asked you this, and I'm wondering, like, did you always know that you wanted to be a midwife?
Pretty much. I was at my first home birth when I was 10. That was my little brother Gray. Then I was at my little brother Garrett's birth, and then I was at to one of my sister's home births after that. And then I was in college when my next sister was born, missed her birth. But anyway, so home birth was something I knew well. And then when I was pregnant by the time I was pregnant with my first, I was already in midwifery school. So yes, somewhere in there, I kind of started in the pre-med track in college studying biology, and then came to realize there was a bigger difference between obstetrics and midwifery. It wasn't just like who got paid more money to do it, that it really was a different way of looking at pregnancy and birth. And I realized, oh, I'm a midwife. I'm not this is not the same thing where you get paid more money. Yeah. So yes, I'm very happy that I realized, I think, practically it was also, I pictured myself being a mom, and I didn't want a job where I saw what doctors were doing just to become doctors and then what to pay off their loans afterwards. And I just was like, I don't want, that was also part of it. It was just the practicality of like midwifery school sounds like something I can do, and I can enjoy working and work the amount I want to work. So
yeah, it had a better work balance for you.
Right.
I'm glad that you brought that up about the different approach to the practice and to women's health that is present between like obstetrics and being a midwife. That was what drove me to it in the first place, like many women. And I want to say that, and we will dive into this a little bit more, but of course, the reason that I wanted to talk to a nurse midwife is because I had all of my babies at home. But for the most part, it's going to be very few women that have medical complexities that are able to still have a home birth. Right. The reason that I had chosen it for my first child, that was a low risk pregnancy. I was very healthy. He was very healthy. And I had actually started off seeing an OB, but it was a very different care that I got, in the sense that the one thing that there's really two instances, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but I can say that at all my appointments, my obstetrician was always ready to get out of there. Like, I was a new mom and I was super excited and I had all these questions, and like the minute I started asking her questions, she stood up and had her hand on the door. Like, I don't have time for this. I got to go. And there was an instance that caused me to switch. But when I did and I started going to birth care, it was night and day. Like, those visits lasted over an hour. They sat down and really, like, I really felt like they cared about me and my wishes and I have a very, I want to say a very, very type A personality. Like I need to feel like I have bodily, like autonomy over my body and like control, and that I'm not losing control during the birth. And the midwives were so amazing about that. Like absolutely you do. So could you speak in your experience, because you're coming at it from a provider's perspective, like the differences between the view and practices?
Yeah. When I hear that, I think it's funny because I almost get defensive of the doctor's point of view, because I know what it's like for them who are trying to be in-network providers, and the type of reimbursement they're getting for these visits is so piddly that they're providing what they're getting paid for. So it's almost like your insurance, like, and we see that a lot where people choose to go to providers that their insurance covers, and then they get what their insurance covers, which is that kind of care. Yeah. So Birth Care did an amazing job. They were in network. They are in network with a lot of people. And I think they're balancing with some cash pay people that are sadly paying more than the insurance companies are paying. So they have that balance. But I do think in network options, we know, make things tricky there. So not necessarily that there are people that didn't care, but it's like what that was on their schedule. Like,
it's funny that you say that, because it is very interesting how when you start to live a little life and your experiences are different, because then like now I've got experiences on both sides, because I went to nursing school and then I worked in a hospital, and then I, as a postpartum nurse, and I worked in a hospital as a lactation consultant, and I was able to be on not a doctor, but their side of it too. And it's like, you can absolutely care, but then in the back of your mind, I've got 7 other moms to see today, and I care about them too.
What I do care about my clients, but what the really good thing that helps me keep providing care is that if I don't do a good job, they're going to leave. And I think sometimes in the hospital setting, there isn't that customer service piece where like they have to provide what you want or you'll leave, because there's not another option. So I think like the fact that we have options and that we live in an area that has so many choices of even home birth midwives, it like keeps us providing really good care. I think like competition is so good. Yeah. And we need to just keep doing the best. So
yeah. And I like that you brought up where the location piece too, because for the listeners, for people listening, when you have birthing options, so much of it matters on like where you're living, because if you want to have a home birth, but you're an hour away from a hospital, if you need that hospital, that hour is going to be a problem. Right. So, and then also not having, all the different people.
Right. I don't think there's anyone who lives in Northern Virginia that isn't
like 10 minutes.
Like that. Yeah. Maybe 20 minutes max. I've had some births where I'm like, oh, this is further into the woods of Manassas or something. But yeah, we're really lucky to really have that option for everyone around here.
Yeah. Can you just speak to the basic, so people know, what are the differences between what a certified nurse midwife can offer versus what a doctor can offer an OB?
So as a certified nurse midwife, we're not trained in surgery. So we're not trained to do C-sections. And what we are trained in is being the experts at natural birth, which I don't believe doctors are trained in. So I think that we each have our specialty, and a great setup is when you have midwives doing normal and you have doctors doing surgery. That's a great team. And I think we have some practices in the area that have really like shown that to be, and you have people choosing the doctors for their vaginal birth. But I think most of the women that want a truly like physiologic birth, which is what we call it, when like labor starts on its own, it progresses on its own, and a mom without the use of medicine is able to birth her baby the way our bodies were meant to do it. So physiologic birth, I think most people that know they want that are seeking out midwifery care, because midwives are the experts in that. And it really is a different training when you're, I kind of take it for granted that we attend births with moms standing or hands and knees or lying on their back or squatting, and none of those feels harder than anything else, because all of them are what we do. And then when you see a doctor that is not comfortable with a mom on their hands and knees, not because they think through that this is not safe, but more like their hands have learned one way to do this, and and their brain isn't able to switch over it. So I've seen doctors have trouble. I'm not saying every doctor. There's a lot of doctors who, thankfully, sometimes it's because they've had a midwife in their practice who's like, taught them a different way, or they knew better and they taught themselves a different way. But I think that's not part of their training, that like the mom is the one who we work around, not the doctor. Yeah. So yeah, I think experts in normal birth, a difference is that I'm not trained to manage like type 1 diabetes or really even gestational hypertension. Those are things where I consider that no longer like normal, healthy pregnancy. And so for those, that's like something where a physician is a really great asset because they have the tools for the medical complexities for the mom. So yeah.
And yes, absolutely for the mom. And so in pregnancy, I think I know the answer, but I want to ask you, obviously. So in pregnancy, mom and baby are viewed as a dyad. So we're treating both at the same time. And right. So we're obviously taking mom's vitals at every appointment and checking on how she's doing and doing blood work and ultrasound scans. We're looking at the baby. And you are sending mom out for stuff like that.
Right. So I've talked more in my mind are the cases where the mom is no longer a great candidate for home birth. But in your situation, you're looking at, we also have those cases where the baby's not a great candidate for home birth. And so, yeah, in cases where, we have moms sometimes that have chosen to do genetic screening. And so we found from that we have a baby that we need to figure out if they're a good candidate for home birth or not. Sometimes we have situations where it's from an anatomy scan. So last year, it was actually this February that the baby was born. So last year that it happened, where we had a mom from her 20-week anatomy scan. She had declined any genetic screening, but from her scan and a heart defect and short femur lengths, it was like, okay, there's a higher likelihood that we have a genetic issue going on. And she said, yes, she would like to do the genetic screening now. So kind of using genetic screening in a reflex capacity where somebody doesn't opt to do it routinely, but if the anatomy scan shows something unusual, that's not the traditional geneticist approach to it, right? They kind of want all the information up front. But a lot of our clients do opt for declining genetic screening, and then they might do it if the anatomy scan points to something. And we sent her to maternal fetal medicine. So that's a special kind of obstetrician who does high risk situations. And they confirmed that, yes, this baby should be born in the hospital. And so she switched practices and planned her hospital birth. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
no, you did that. No, that's very good. And you definitely assessed where I was coming from in the right way, which is, sometimes we know right away, like if a mom is risking out because of her health. But like you said, a lot of times that any kind of complexities with babies are caught at that 20-week scan. And then sometimes they're not, right? So what do you do if, so far mom's been healthy and low risk, and then you find out at birth that, right, potentially baby has medical complexity. So how do you approach that?
Right. So a couple of babies this year that come to mind are like earlier in the year. And I think I didn't even ask you about this to remind me, but I think you were the lactation consultant for one of our babies that was smaller than, like, small for gestational age, I think like 4 pounds, 9 ounces, not what we expected when she went into labor at 37 weeks. So it's clear that there was something, it might have been a result of her blood pressure was creeping up at the end. And we were actually looking at maybe needing to send her to the hospital, and then she went into labor. So it was like, okay, we're gonna have a baby before this blood pressure becomes fully an issue. And she had a great birth, and this baby was very small. That's something where, her fundal heights had increased enough that we hadn't done extra testing yet, but probably if she had stayed pregnant beyond 37 weeks, we would have started to see something not right. And so that's a situation where we were glad that she went into labor, and that little baby just did really well breastfeeding. Am I right that you were with her?
Yeah, I remember that baby. That baby
Yeah.
did amazing. I love seeing stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know where that fits in medically complex. I don't know if you would call her that, but I mean, small for gestational age. That's something where, you know, we were kind of keeping an eye and deciding whether she was going to get to stay home or need to go to the hospital, and she got to stay home. So that was great.
Yeah.
Another baby born this year that you have also gotten to see was a baby that had a normal anatomy scan, was born and but visually had Down syndrome. And unlike the baby I talked about from last year, you know, didn't have a heart defect that was seen on the anatomy scan. And so again, that baby got to stay home and get good lactation care and good pediatrician care, and is really thriving and exclusively breastfeeding. So,
yeah. So for the most part, in your experience, if something is caught on this 20-week scan, then they will transfer out. But then at birth, at this point, like in your 14-year career, you've been, I don't know, is it lucky, or it's just the 1% of 1%. So you just don't see it as often. Where
I mean, it's
birth.
funny for me. It's funny for me to be talking about these 2 Down syndrome babies in these 2 years, because those are the 2 of my 14-year career. Like, no, that's not true. One born at the birth center in my first year. I mean, I still had another midwife with me at that birth, so I know it was very early on. And then all these years, and
that's amazing.
I don't want to, you're so nervous when you say you give your stats and you haven't like looked back over. Like,
no, and that's all right. You're not on trial. I didn't make you swear in with the Bible. We're okay.
But yeah, I mean, and then 12 years go by, and then you have 2 in 2 years.
2 in a year. Isn't that weird?
2 in a year. Right.
Okay. Well, hey, you watch out, because like another one's coming, right? It's in 3s.
Right. So, but I will tell you that both of those babies are such blessings to those families. And that's what I hear from those families. Yeah, and,
absolutely.
The mom that needed to change her birth plan, it was not someone that ever would have had a hospital birth if she could have avoided. She was not somebody that was, wanting to go that route, and she was ready to do it for her baby. And, the second mom, I don't think she was somebody who, knowing that her baby had Downs, would have chosen to have a home birth, honestly. Like, when I think about, like, I'm trying to decide that. Like, I don't know. I should ask her that. Like, what if we'd known? Because I don't even know what I would say if she asked me that. Okay, Story, what if you had known that the baby had Downs, that we didn't see a heart defect? Like, just knowing that, like, I think because there's so much pressure from the hospital side of things that you be responsible midwife, that if something did happen, if your baby, if this baby did have, even unrelated to their Downs, babies sometimes have breathing issues, or what if, and then you go to the hospital with this situation, the question is like, well, why were you having this baby at home? Like what, there's so much pressure. And when you hear about midwives whose licenses come under attack from whatever outcomes, even if it's a baby, everybody's healthy, but it tends to be, they say, this is not my research, this is just what midwives say, it's the neonatologists that call the board of nursing and do this. It's not the family, it's not even the OBs. It's like the neonatologist says, why was this baby born at home, or what, so and nobody says about the baby born in the hospital who needs to go to the NICU, well, why did this happen? Well, because then that's what the NICU's for. And that's kind of how I feel about these, a home birth baby. And I had sorry to derail this, but like I had my first baby born at home, did really well, but like wasn't transitioning well, like was born breathing, whatever, and just didn't transition well, kept breathing fast for a long time. And the midwife was like, do you remember Alice? She was.
I do, because Alice is who was at Lincoln's birth.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yes. So Alice was there. She was actually my mom's midwife when I talked about with my siblings. So cool. Yeah. So Alice was my mentor midwife and my own midwife and my mom's midwife.
That is crazy. Cool.
But yeah, she said, we've given him a long time. He needs to go in. But yeah, there was so much like, well, this is because you had a home birth. That's a lot of the the feeling that you get in that hospital environment. So unfortunately, I think some of the decisions and some of my answers to your questions about like, well, which babies should be born at home and which shouldn't, I think partly it's like, if you know anything is up with a baby and you know you're going to be under such scrutiny, the question is always like, why did you do this?
Yeah.
And so I think, unfortunately, we don't get to always make those decisions based purely on safety.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I want people listening, I realize that like my situation is very unique, and honestly, last week you heard us talk to Julia, and she's the mom that had the diagnosis of Down syndrome at birth. Her situation is unique because her baby actually is doing really well. And a lot of really well. And a lot of Down syndrome babies don't. But I believe so very strongly in giving women choices. And I realize that it's such a slim and narrow group that would be able to say, okay, my child's medical complexity does not impact birth and should not necessarily rule us out for the type of birth that we want. And that should be respected and supported, because there's got to be, I mean, granted, I'm sure it's small, but there's got to be women who are as crazy as I am and are like, I'm going to do what I want to do no matter what. So can you help me make it the most safe as possible?
Well, another ethical thing to think through is conditions that are not compatible with life. And when I think about those moms, I'm not talking from an experience, because I have not had that client approach me and say, well, I'll talk about slightly different earlier pregnancy losses in this category, kind of like past first trimester, but still early. But those women, I have not had a client yet approach me and say, my baby is not going to live, and I don't want that birth to happen in the hospital. But I'm thinking, like, if that were me, and I'm going to spend maybe a couple hours with a baby before they pass away, or whatever the scenario. Yeah. And I think part of it is like, well, we don't know. And so I think that will drive a lot of people to the hospital. Like, what if there's something that the hospital can provide? So I don't know the exact scenario that I'm talking about, but
I'm glad that you brought that up too, because another person that I've had an opportunity to talk to is the person that is a grief counselor and is talking women through very serious medical complexities. Most of the women that she sees, those babies aren't making it to delivery, to birth. And so are there any of those women who, knowing that their baby's not going to survive, would they want the opportunity to have a choice over how they birth? And I do know that one of the questions she asked them is, do you want to have this baby vaginally, or do you want to have this baby as a C-section? But what if it was, do you want to have this baby vaginally because it's safe? And do you want to do that in the comfort of your own home? Because this is a trauma. You know what I mean?
Right. And when I think about, and think you think about too, like your home births and your children's role at those, and this is their sibling too, and this might be their only, especially now with hospitals only allowing one person in, and there's just so many thoughts,
so many factors. Yeah, there's so many factors to that. Oh God, that's a good thing that you brought up the siblings.
And so when I'm thinking about my client last year who had a 15-week loss, 15 or 16, sorry that I'm not remembering. But it was very late for a miscarriage, and everything is like hospital induction. Like that's the only thing that's recommended. And she said, I've had a home birth. I want my kids to meet this baby. I want to do this. And, we talked through risk and benefits. We talked about, hemorrhage is one of the things that can happen. We need to be ready to go to the hospital. Like I can only do this if you really understand that we need to go to the hospital when we need to go. And she understood, and she's so happy. She's just so happy about her birth. And I ran into her mother the other day, and her mother, who I don't really even know, she's like, but I know who you are. And thank you so much. It made all the difference to her that's how this baby's birth got to go. And, it makes you like, okay, there's times to think through, count the cost. Don't be negligent. Don't fail to recognize what can happen. But also, like, the way people experience their baby's birth matters.
Yeah. And I want to just state super clearly for those people listening that what we're talking about is prioritizing safety. But when those boxes have been checked, that we're talking about giving women and families, actually, not just the birthing woman, but like we've been saying, the partner, the siblings, giving them a little bit more autonomy and control over how do they want to see this happen.
Right.
And before, again, anybody thinks that I'm supporting things that are not safe, because I'm not. You know, I think that this needs to be a team approach. I think that if we're going about it safely, we need to make sure that, especially with medically complex kids, again, mentioning my experience, I went to every doctor. I went to my perinatologist. I went to my son Tyson we had already created a team for him at that point. He had a pediatric urologist, a pediatric nephrologist. He had his own pediatrician, his regular pediatrician. I went to every one of them. And I was like, does his condition impact his birth?
Right.
And when they all said no.
Right. Kidneys, that's interesting, because I actually haven't talked to you about your son and for you to remind me about his situation. But kidney things are one of the most common things where we would say we're aware of this thing on the scan and we're going to proceed with a home birth, because it is like something that, we're going to need to deal with it if we need to deal with it. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what's interesting, again, is that because I had a home birth, my children all had a chance to hold Tyson, and we had to immediately leave, but they all had a chance to hold him and meet him. And that might, like, you know, because the way that things played out in my story, it could have gone really south, and then that would have been their only chance. But thankfully it didn't. We only spent a week in the NICU and we got to come home. But like how important that was that they all got that, and how what you said with your previous client, how important it was that they had that time at home, being able to hold the baby, and just giving women another option. Yeah. So, how do you expect people, or how do you help people, not expect, but how do you help people emotionally prepare for the birth of their baby? And how do you expect them to prepare, help them prepare in the need or the event of having to transfer?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to speak to it just generally and not so much the medical complexity, because I don't have a lot of known medical complexity situations like that, where we're anticipating them, I guess I should say. So but yes, every woman who plans a home birth needs to also know that she could have a hospital birth. Like, the thing that makes home birth safe is that we have hospitals available. And so we do our community care visits, which is all the moms do in the same month. And that's a good time for us to kind of talk through some of these things. So we talk through where the hospital is, like what our preferred hospital is, what their nearest hospital is, because those are sometimes not the same thing. Emergencies would be like the nearest hospital, but most transfers are non-emergent, and we get to go where we want to go, where we've got a great team of midwives and doctors. And if people are local, Centerville OBGYN is the practice that they really get that home birth transfer thing really well. But I think when it was important to me to read the Home Birth Cesarean book. That's a book that's kind of geared toward women who plan a home birth, but then had a cesarean. Does not mean the cesarean happened at home. Don't be confused about that. The title's a little like, but my takeaway from that book, which I read a long time ago, was basically like the people that are most traumatized are saying, like, I never thought that could happen to me. Mm-hmm. And so my takeaway was like, I don't want anyone to think that could never happen. Like me having my 6th baby, I did that, what I tell people to do, which is spend a little time thinking about, like, if the safest way for me to have this baby is to have a C-section, that's how I want to have this baby. Right. So I think, like, everyone taking that time in their pregnancy to think through it, like, oh, why will that be unpleasant? Why will that be okay? What will make it okay? And, just like think about it for a while and then put it away. Right. Yeah. That's kind of, I think, the process, the same way we cope with thinking, like, what if my child is born and they do have a condition that I don't expect? Okay. Think about that. It's going to be okay. Like, but it's, I think it's harder to do when we already know, right? I'm sure, not speaking from experience, but like when a mom already knows their baby's going to be born with something complex, that's probably harder because there's all these unknowns there, and they probably need to spend time thinking about it and then put it away and say, like, we don't know, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I think it's just good to remember it can happen. Remember that the hospital is where you want to be when you have a medical problem.
Yeah. And that's the goal that's really set in any medical situation, is like, number one, healthy mom, healthy baby, you know, and we want to have autonomy of our choices. We want to be able to have like that beautiful home birth, but you set up women to know that, you know, let's think about this for a second if it becomes an option, so that you're prepared, and then put it away. So what happens and how do you approach it professionally? And steering back, I guess, a little bit to, you know, you've had just a few situations where you've had to help a mom navigate an unexpected condition at birth. How do you approach that conversation with her?
In both situations, I'll be interested. I haven't heard Julia's interview yet, so I'm like so curious to hear how we each remember that day differently, or the same, or whatever.
All good things.
Yeah, I mean, just my feeling was seeing the baby and thinking that baby has Down syndrome, and then second guessing myself and being very relieved when my student midwife said that baby has Down syndrome, right? And my thought was the baby was very healthy. The baby was breathing, like everything was great. So I said, I anticipated, I was ready for her to say to me, my baby has Down syndrome, right? And because that's what had happened the only other time that, 10 years ago, or maybe more, maybe 13 years ago, I don't know. It was just kind of this like waited for the mom to kind of say, that's what I am seeing. And so I was like hoping that that's how it would play out again. And yeah, anyway, I don't want to tell other people's stories, but I think that, everybody's a little different in how I'll be interested to hear her story. I feel like it's her story to tell. But yeah, I think that when there's not a medical issue, there's benefit in like, first just absorb that you have a baby, right? Like it's the same way that like, when you don't know if it's a boy or a girl and the baby's born, everyone else in the room cares. Is it a boy or girl? And all you care is like, you got your baby out. Mm-hmm. And you need a moment to like care about anything else. And that's kind of what I want it to be. Like, I think that's the important thing is like, and that's one thing that I thought, oh, I'm so happy for her that this baby was born at home, because I pictured, and I don't want to be uncharitable in what I imagine would have happened at the hospital, but it's just, oh my goodness, I can just picture the team of 4 becomes a team of 12 very quickly in that room. And like,
and she's no longer holding that baby.
Yeah. And so for me to know that that was uninterrupted time in her own bed with her own husband and baby, while we just waited for her to absorb, that was, I think, beautiful. So
you approached it the same way that you approach any other birth, which is take the moment that you need because you just had a baby, this huge ordeal you just went through. Take that moment. Whew, it's done. The birth is done, and hold on and enjoy your baby. Get that beautiful bonding moment.
Right.
So no matter.
And that's what I would say. That's what I would say to anybody who's like already knows their baby has an issue. Is like, I don't know, like preserve what you can. I think it's hard in the hospital where litigious ideas get in the way of actual family time. It's sad. And I don't think it's a fault of a person in the room. I think it's a fault of a system. So yeah, I don't know how to fix it, but I think like preserve what you can, make your birth plan clear about what's important to you and how you can like kind of save what you can save of the beauty of it, because it was so beautiful. There was just, and she saved that same treasuring of her baby through every day that I've seen her and talked to her. It's like she's I don't know if she said it to you, but like She said, people say things to me that make me know that they feel sorry for me, and I don't feel sorry for myself.
Yeah, she did say that. And I love that. Yeah, she's just so in love with her beautiful baby girl, and so, just appreciative of how well she's doing. And like she mentioned something that really, like, I connected with too, but it's like you don't realize that you're holding that, which is that when people find out that your child has a condition, it no longer becomes about congratulations on this beautiful baby. It becomes about, oh, I'm sorry, but you really still want to hear congratulations. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so she's really happy, as she should be. She's got a beautiful
She's so
baby
beautiful.
girl. She's so great.
Well, Megan, it was so fun to talk to you.
Yeah.
I've got to go see my next
Yes,
one.
please. I know you're so busy. You got to go be there for all your moms. Tori, thank you. I really appreciate your time. You are doing such good work in the community, and I'm really, really grateful that you're here.
Well, I'm grateful to you. Thanks for helping all our babies breastfeed.
Bye.
All right, bye.
I'm so glad that you guys got to listen to Story. She is a fantastic, fantastic midwife. And again, it is not really for most women that know in their pregnancy that they're going to have a medically complex child. Most of the time, God, probably 99.5% of the time, that means that you do need to have a hospital birth for it to be safe. But I think that knowing that you have options, that is what is important. Because if that is what you want, in the future, if there's a possibility of setting it up to where this could be safe, then women just need to have the options to be able to do it. And certified nurse midwives do also work in the hospital. So you can have somebody come in and get who is experienced in physiological labor, be there for the birth of your baby. Now, once baby is out, of course, it may look a little bit differently. A lot of the times, if we know in advance that baby is going to have, a complex condition, then the neonatologist is already in the room. And so mom may not get that immediate skin to skin time because the baby is likely going to be going to the neonatologist, and sometimes in the room, and sometimes it's short. Sometimes the neonatologist needs to do her exam, and then 15 minutes later, mom gets baby back. But one of the things that Story and I were talking about is how important it is for women to know what's going to happen, because, some studies have shown that if we know what's going to happen and we can run it through in our minds and just prepare for it, even in the smallest ways, we are able to mentally process it better if that is the scenario that plays out. And that's really important for our mental health. So, postpartum period can be a challenging period, even in a healthy pregnancy, healthy term baby. And it's even more important, or equally important. It's just important when we know that we're going to have a baby that is going to require some extra love and extra care. So I'm really glad that you guys at least got to hear from a home birth midwife. In her 14 years, she's had, 3 babies that, that ended up having medical complexities. So it's definitely a small percentage, but good for you guys to know about that. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you were able to get, something interesting, connect with anything that I said, or learn something new from Story. I'm really excited for our future upcoming guests. We're going to have a lot more medical professionals and experts come up in the future weeks. So we're going to go really in depth about a lot of that and from the medical side. So that's going to be really great episodes for you to tune in and listen to. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Again, I'm your host, Megan Pond. This is Babywearing, Breastfeeding, Nurturing Miracles. Have a great week.
Thank you all for joining us on today's episode of Babywearing and Breastfeeding, Nurturing Miracles. I hope you found our discussion enlightening and that you leave feeling supported and empowered. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Tune in next week for more insights and conversations that connect us all in the shared experience of parenting. Until then, take care and cherish every miracle with your little ones.